Hello, and welcome to a bonus episode of the Datum podcast. This is, I think we're going to call this a hot take episode, right, Tim?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's some news on the block since you've been away. In fact, you've been away for a couple of weeks, and then you've come back to a bit of a change in the landscape, right?
Right, exactly. It's funny because I've been away for about 2.5 weeks for some family stuff, with a family member getting married. And yeah, I've come back to, it's like that. Have you seen that scene in Community where Donald Glover comes back in holding pizzas and the entire room's on fire?
Yeah,
That
right.
was sort of my initial reaction to this news, but I think over the few days it's sort of I've let myself tick along slowly and let the news sink in. So,
Good.
what's the news? What's the big thing that's changed?
So, a certain company that has CRM as their stock symbol,
Hmm.
Salesforce, has decided to enter into acquisition talks with Tableau. I say enter because I don't think it's a done deal yet. They've just agreed to buy the company, but that doesn't mean they've bought the company just yet.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of these things where it's like an agreement has been reached at a high level to buy the company at this price, and now and then it's going to be the lawyers now get involved to do the actual transition. So I think it'll be a few months still before we get Tableau a Salesforce company or something similar.
Exactly. I think this took a lot of people by surprise, actually, didn't it? Didn't it? No one, I guess. Well, did it or didn't it? Up
I
to you.
think there's a couple of levels to this. I personally, it was surprising it's now. I think that's the big thing, right? It's a
Hmm.
surprise that it's the news came now at this time rather than everyone sort of somewhat expected Tableau to be bought out by one of the bigger boys. Eventually, the AWSs, the Googles, that sort of company that will just like bring it into its own cloud offering. I don't think anyone expected Salesforce per se to be making this move. However, if you sort of kept an eye on sort of the M&A sphere of around data and analytics in this area, like Salesforce, everyone talks about MuleSoft.
Hmm.
Salesforce bought MuleSoft last year, but there was a few leaked documents, I think a year or so ago, where they mentioned that Salesforce are interested in looking at Tableau. So it's not that much of a surprise. I think the surprise is that first of all, it came now, in the middle of 2019,
Yeah.
after some pretty big releases from Tableau. And then secondly, that it came so fast off the heels of another big acquisition, which was Looker being bought by Google Cloud Platform last week.
Right. I mean, in my mind, I think of this in really simple terms. I think of it as a game of Pac-Man, right?
Right.
Because um, I find it sort of ironic because I think what happens sometimes, Tableau themselves achieved a lot of growth by acquiring other companies. So
Hmm.
Hyper was an acquisition. The Ask Data capabilities
Calligraph.
came through. Yeah, Colligraph came through an acquisition. And so it's fascinating that people don't expect the opposite to happen, where a bigger Pac-Man turns up on the game and
Right. There's
just
always a bigger fish,
yeah,
right?
yeah, there's always a bigger fish coming behind you. So yeah, in some ways, I think you're right. Happening now is a surprise. Maybe we can go into this in a bit more detail in a
Hmm.
second. But also, I think there's also the other side of this, which is there's been lots of talk of it. It was inevitable at some stage because I guess Tableau's aspirations maybe exceed the level of cash it's able to generate,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. For
and so
R&D and
exactly,
development.
exactly. And those numbers are never really widely shared, but for them to have been seeking this acquisition, you never go into a deal like this unless one party is willing to be acquired, if that makes sense. So
Right.
it also paints a bit of color as to maybe what the CEO's sort of task in hand was when he joined the
Yeah.
company. So yeah.
I think that's a really interesting. That's a really key point you mentioned there. So Adam Silipsky came in a couple of years, 2 years ago now. Right, he's done two Tableau
Hmm.
conferences, from what
Hmm.
I understand. I've seen him speak twice, so I think this
Hmm.
might be in his third one. And he came in after Christian Chabot, and this Tableau started off this company which is small and fun, and then it sort of grew, and then there was that nosedive. Do you remember the nosedive in the stock
Hmm.
prices because of
Hmm.
some lower forecasts for the year?
Yeah.
Now when Silipsky joined, he came from obviously Amazon Web Services, and then changed the way that Tableau operated, moving towards subscription as a big change. Then the more recent licensing changes. Um, And it's I think I read somewhere that it started off as a 4 billion cap company,
Hmm.
and now they've sold it as a 15 billion. When it's this is Silipsky's time frame when he came in, their market cap was 4 billion, and now they've sold it 15 billion. So for
Hmm.
him, he's done his job in a very interesting way. Now, I think to your point of the technical advancements, you've seen this moving forward more recently. Like the reason Tableau, I don't want to say stopped innovating, but sort of stopped doing things in house and sort of looked to purchase companies that are already doing it to give them that jump, that head start into spaces like Hyper, into spaces like Ask Data.
Hmm.
This is a similar sort of move, right? Like you either buy another company or you get bought and then use complementary technologies, right?
Hmm.
Like this is the sort of thing that I see as that stage of maturity, as it were, within Tableau's journey as a
Yeah.
company.
Hmm. I agree, and I think there's a little bit of that sort of played through in the announcement because
Hmm.
Salesforce actually agreed to acquire Tableau for 15.7 billion,
Hmm.
but at the time of the acquisition, its evaluation was 10 billion. So even Salesforce there adding 5.7 billion's worth of value to the current price
Ah,
of the Tableau share. So that in itself sort of says something about where Salesforce sees sort of the value and maybe the value that's been added in the current years, but maybe this value has been sort of a much longer, a longer kind of term thing. This has always been, I guess, people like you and me will say, "Oh, Tableau's always been great."
right. But like you said, this Tableau again. Let's not forget. Like so, the information lab who we worked for started in what 2011,
Hmm.
2012,
Hmm.
and like with that was it. Tableau was not a company in Europe. Like we always talk about the fact that the information lab was in Europe selling Tableau before Tableau had a proper presence, right?
Yeah.
Um, and this is really important. Like Tableau is quite a young company in some ways, but the innovation and the scale that it's had gone through in the last few years to make it a bit more inverted commas enterprise ready. I saw a screenshot of the first ever Tableau server offering
Hmm.
when I was looking at some documentation recently or a couple of weeks ago, and it's come so far, right? In terms of UX, in terms of UI, in terms of the way it looks and feels. I remember my first version was Tableau 9, and that jump from the look and feel and the features in Tableau 10, and
Yeah.
certainly definitely now 2019.2 that's just
Hmm.
released. It's moving at such a fast pace, and I think in order to keep up that level of innovation, that level of scalability, and meeting the demands of users as the company grows, as the brand grows, this is the stuff that excites me. This is the fact that they're now part of Salesforce. What does that mean? So they've got this Einstein Analytics offering, which is like their
Hmm.
just all analytics end to end, right? Like so,
Hmm.
that includes AI, all of their systems, yada yada yada. Now
Hmm.
Tableau can now share those technological advances, and sort of take in like it's quite funny. I think Rachel Costa, who works for the Information Lab and now works for the UN, she built some dashboard starters, right? I think for
Yeah.
Salesforce, is that
Yeah. Yeah.
correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
So,
And
like, go on.
yeah, no, and it's funny because those Salesforce connectors were just hooking straight into Salesforce data sources. So these are sort of almost consider them as templated dashboards that you can just plug into your own data, your own organization, and immediately get some value from them.
Mhm. And that's so different from how Tableau used to be under, the headship of Christian Chabot, like the early days, right? When it's like, no, data is your canvas, you choose what to do.
Hmm.
And now we're getting to a point where, well, actually, let's help you steer in the direction. Here's some templates because the more people that are getting on board, you haven't got pockets of energized user that are just using this thing for fun as much anymore. Like it's now becoming to a point where Tableau is almost a requirement at some stage, right? At some
Yeah.
level.
And also, Tableau's also been acquiring a lot of intellectual property. I was
Mhm.
actually, it's just fun fact, actually. Can you do you recall the last acquisition Tableau made?
It the semantics engine.
No, so the last four acquisitions, I guess, the most widely known ones, because you don't actually have to report an acquisition
Okay.
unless it's above a certain size.
Right.
But the last reported one was a company called Empirical Systems in 2018 of last
Ah.
year.
Hmm.
The one before that was ClearGraph, which we've
Hmm.
all seen in the product through
That's the
things like,
semantics engine. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And then the one before that was Hyper,
Hmm.
right? And then previous to that was another one called InfoActive. So there's actually 4 acquisitions there, and each of those have actually brought in specific IP that I think we've seen in the product fairly quickly after. So it also shows that Tableau is capable of not just bringing in IP, but capitalizing it, adding value, and then turning it into sort of I guess subscriptions now, whereas before it used to be just perpetual licenses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that turnaround time is really important, really key, especially now. I think I've heard summaries of this investor call that happened straight after the announcement of the intention to purchase. And there's obviously a lot of jokes about the fact that the guy on the call was saying Vizzies instead of Vizzes, but that's all by the by. Like, it's all education. You can't joke about that stuff. Like, we didn't call it visualization before. We all call it charts and graphs. It's standard.
It
people
just depends
thinking,
who you stood next to. We can all be humbled by someone.
Exactly. So it's quite interesting to see. But I think the key thing there, they always mention the community, and I think what's interesting to me is the Salesforce community is much bigger and much more diverse than the Tableau one, from what I can understand. Right?
So no, it is. Yeah.
Like, the conferences are over 100,000 people. Like, you've got the amount of their equivalent to Zen's is the Trailblazers. So I'm really interested to see how that diversification, that integration happens, because I'd love to learn more about them. Like, I think there's a guy called Prislam who mentioned really interestingly that the learning and development platform that Salesforce have is really, really good. Like, I think we've been looking at AWS recently, and we also have very good things to say about that learning platform, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing I kind of I'm really excited, actually. It's the new people and the new kind of dialogues and the new conversations. I mean, in the immediate sense, I guess nothing changes, right? Everything is all pen and paper. It takes a couple of years for the cultural sort of fit and transitions to take place. There's likely to be sort of reorganizations. I know Salesforce have, I think, said they'll just let Tableau sort of run independently, but then my view on that is, well, why did you buy them then? You don't buy a car to put it in the garage. You buy a car to drive it. So eventually something will change. But for now, yes, as things sort of play out, for end users and maybe even employees, things remain broadly the same. I'm really excited to see what happens at conference this year, because this is early enough.
There's one next week.
This is early enough for there to be reflected in 2 conferences. So there's the Tableau conference next week that you're going to, right?
I am, yeah. So I'm there from Monday till Thursday. So if anyone wants to catch me there, I'm going to be around. I've got a session on Tuesday that I'll plug, obviously, just before Data Night's out. But yeah, that'll be really interesting to see the dynamic and also people's thoughts on the acquisition.
Absolutely.
I guess it's similar thoughts, hopefully, to what we're sharing. But
yeah, and we've titled this show sort of a hot take, but I expect most of what comes out of the conference next week will be general sort of hot takes and sort of aggregations of thoughts that have happened in a week. However, what will happen in Vegas is, I'm hoping, a more sort of concise dialogue about where Salesforce and Tableau are going to go together, because there's enough time there for at least the deal to kind of play out, and I'm hoping for the visionaries, i.e. the CEOs, maybe even to present
the product
together,
managers,
right? I fully expect to see the Salesforce CEO on stage if this deal closes in good time, and so
Agreed.
that should be where we start to see, okay, what's actually changing here? What are the developers thinking? What are the employees thinking at both companies? Do we have an influx of Salesforce users at Tableau conference who've maybe considered Tableau but have used other tools? And so on and so forth. The other aspect is, I think this is interesting because Salesforce, prescribing this value to Tableau sends a signal about Tableau, and I think it's worth just considering sort of the knock-on effects that can happen from things like this. Because if you were, let's say, considering Tableau, Power BI, and maybe a bunch of other tools, not that it's going to change your mind based on sort of the features and the capabilities of the product, but I think it does sort of send a signal
Confidence, right?
Yeah, it sends a signal of confidence. Like you kind of have this idea that now Tableau is going to be around for some time now. It's under a nice big umbrella that's weathered a lot of sort of different climates, and it's good for it, right?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think there's in the short to medium short term, I don't think much is going to change. As you say, in
Hmm.
the medium terms where things are going to get interesting. For now, I think the intention to have Tableau as an independent company makes sense because what you do is you just say, well, we've got Tableau under our hood. Let's bring them in really quickly for a conversation, and also they're part of the family, so they're integrating really nicely. That
Hmm.
they understand our culture, they understand the pipelines and the data flows and all these different technologies that Salesforce have to offer under their umbrella.
Hmm.
So that's all positive. That's all really really good stuff. Now, if I'm putting my pessimistic hat on, I my concerns are around the technology that Tableau owns. Right, I think that
Okay, yeah,
that's where my personal concerns
and the
are
IP.
there, and the IP exactly because now inherently that IP will be owned by Salesforce, right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm. Hmm.
things like Hyper, things like ClearGraph and Ask Data, things like the fundamentals for VizQL. The
Hmm.
thing that's built similar to RenderMan and that was on Pixar. Like we all love telling that story, but now that's Salesforce tech. Now there is obviously that two-way thing. We Tableau will be able to benefit, and we and then in kind will be able to benefit from Salesforce tech and their innovations. But similarly, they'll be able to look at and take advantage of Tableau's tech. Does that mean in 10 years' time Tableau gets rolled into the packaging? Who knows? We can't make that decision, but that's
Yeah.
something to be aware of at least. Just to bookend my that sort of thought process for me, I like analytics, right? I think that my personal view is analytics is analytics. I just
Hmm.
prefer using Tableau because it's easy to use, it's fun, it's something that I understand. But the what's the word? The ideas and the culture behind it,
Hmm.
that's all going to be the same. Like we still can approach Tableau and certainly for us Alteryx projects in a similar way. We will
Hmm.
still think about data in a similar way, and we still have this questions first approach, right? Than
Yeah,
sort of a
absolutely.
prescriptive environment. So I'm still optimistic. I'm still very much on the train. I think this is a really exciting time to be in BI again, given the Looker acquisition alongside the Tableau acquisition. And yeah, really interesting seeing where it goes from here. I
Yeah.
don't. Do you have any negative feelings here? Do you have any
Um,
things to be concerned about?
I guess there's always the issue I have with acquisitions is especially when it comes from a company who has an appetite for acquisitions. I'm just looking at a
Mm.
diagram of Salesforce acquisitions, and literally there's more Salesforce acquisitions than there are Tableau products and probably Tableau
Wow.
developers that I know. Just by first name basis.
Right.
So they've got quite an appetite for that, and I always wonder about focus, right? Because when you become an acquisition of a company as big as Salesforce, you can sometimes just the focus is now shared. The mind share within Salesforce is not just a Tableau centric one. It's now amongst a bunch of other tools, and so I always wonder, what do Salesforce shareholders want from Salesforce, right? Because now that becomes the drive for what Tableau does in the direction. Okay, so whereas
Right.
before Tableau shareholders were pretty happy with Tableau just growing and so on and so forth, you then start to think, okay, well, what do Salesforce shareholders want to see from Salesforce acquisitions, right? Do they want to see them integrated? Do they want to see
Hmm.
them spun? And I don't have enough context and knowledge to understand sort of how what are the most successful acquisitions? How have they played out? How have they
Yeah.
gone? Have they ever done an acquisition at the scale of Tableau's size? These are all questions that I'm not well informed enough on. But these are the kind of things I'm excited to sort of find out over the next few months, because I think that will really sort of tell a tale. And if this is the first time they want to do something different, then I think I'll be more concerned, because when you try and do something different and you're one kind of company and you're the size of Salesforce,
Yeah.
it's really, really hard to turn the ship. It's almost you've genuinely got to
But
sort
this
of
is why you buy. This is why you buy stuff, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Because you're so ingrained in old tech that in order to change, you acquire someone that's further ahead in that line than you.
But the analogy I always give is I relate to things I do understand. So when Disney bought Pixar, for example, Okay.
Okay.
Now, a lot of people saw that as an acquisition, but in the creative world, that was seen as a merger because Pixar had this creative sort of powerhouse and this sort of culture that just Disney just didn't know how to sort of, create. And if you look at Disney before they acquired Pixar, it wasn't performing as well in the cinemas with its creative sort of endeavors. Then once it's bought Pixar and the teams kind of merged and some of those, benefits went across companies, Pixar capitalizing from Disney's scale, Disney
Yeah.
capitalizing from Pixar's creativity. You start to see a very different kind of Disney that's now
That's a really good point.
completely unstoppable. And so I wonder if this is that. Is it actually more of a merger? Okay, yeah.
Is it
Salesforce
Lucasfilm or Pixar?
Yeah, exactly. Well put.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking about this analogy. I love it because Pixar is 100% that creative drive. Like you don't get a Pixar film every year. You're not just churning out blockbusters. You're doing it methodically because each scene takes like a year. All this like stuff you hear about Pixar that's incredible. Like I think Toy Story 4 is literally the most lifelike cat I've ever seen. But it's this thing of Disney hasn't bought Pixar to change what Pixar do. They've bought Pixar to benefit from all the ideas that it has and the forward-thinking culture that it sort of brings. Whereas buying Lucasfilm and the rights to Star Wars was 100% a blockbuster drive, right?
Exactly.
It's 100% something that's based on the fact that Star Wars is this brand that people just you will just go and see, right? Same as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you will just go and see it.
Yeah.
And you can just churn out all these blockbusters, but Pixar's a bit more, it's nuanced. It's got its own little crew. Its own little, I think I like the Pixar analogy, right? I think that hopefully is what's happening here.
And that's the thing that time will tell, right? We don't really know. I think one of the things I've taken away from this is it sort of drums this point home, I think, more generally, just stepping back away from Salesforce, how important it is to understand the industry and the wide industry. Because I think, especially in the Tableau world, we can be guilty of investing so much into just one thing, right? Tableau Prep comes out, we just all in on the Tableau world because we sip the Kool-Aid, we love it so much, the community's great, you just can't imagine anything else, right? But then you forget that obviously there are other players and there are other contexts, there are other integration points that exist out there, and this is a really strong reminder that this acquisition highlights it. You should have known about Salesforce's sort of desire to buy an analytics company. We should have also maybe understood Google's desire to buy something. Obviously, those things aren't public, but actually,
if you sit down and sort of listen to the words, right? If you listen to the words behind the words, I think I always do this at Tableau conference as well. When you don't listen to, here's our big new feature. You listen to what is this driving to, right? I think the underlying messages from companies like Google, companies like AWS, when Google started with Data Studio 3 years ago now, it was very much dipping its toe in the water. Now they're like, right, you know what? There might be something in this where there's enough people using GCP, Google Cloud Platform, for us to think about, let's do an end-to-end solution for analytics, for data. We've got storage down with Google BigQuery. We've got a VM software because of our scale, so they offer compute. Let's build a BI solution. So Looker can do that for them. And hey, they might transform Looker into something more, right? It might be, again, it's choosing the right tool for the use cases. That's exactly what it always comes down to.
Yeah, it's funny because just a few days before the acquisition, Google acquired Looker, and that boosted Tableau's own share price by 6%. So
really?
Yeah. So that was in itself an interesting
reaction from the market.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, and what I always like about share prices is I never think of it as like an accurate sort of representation of the value of a company in terms of the values you and I see it. But what it does do is it does tell you where the market is, and when there's sudden jumps and sudden reevaluations, it shows you that the market wasn't accounting for something, it wasn't considering something. Okay, and so this 6% jump when Google acquired Looker was basically a signal of the market saying, wait, hold on a minute. Maybe this Tableau stock I have is actually way more valuable because we know that Looker, if you compare it to Tableau, it's not as an attractive target. You wouldn't have put Looker over Tableau if you were sort of comparing them side to side, unless there's some sort of edge case that really sort of leans you towards Looker.
Yeah.
But immediately signals, companies like Tableau, Microsoft Power BI obviously is owned by Microsoft, so they already have.
They're unlikely to be bought out, right?
Exactly. Unless Microsoft spin that out, that's in a safe place as it is. So one of the things we've talked about ages ago, Ravi, is aggregation theory. And,
correct. Oh yes, we need to come back to that one.
And it's funny. I think of Ben Thompson and his discussions about the aggregation of everything.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking, oh gosh, Salesforce is the aggregator. Here we go.
It is. Yeah, that's a really good point. I had a fleeting thought about that. You hearing the Ben Thompson voice in my head being like, the excitable pace, like it's an aggregator.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that, and it comes back to our point about platforms before, right?
Absolutely. And it's sort of like, well, what is Salesforce wanting to be the aggregator of? And it's going back to the stock symbols. Salesforce at the moment is CRM and the stock market. Tableau is data. And so you can kind of see Salesforce making this play to be the SaaS backend of enterprises, basically, full stop. Mm-hmm. Whether it's data, customers, or people. I'm highly expecting to buy a HR platform very soon. That would sort of complete the stock. And by the way, that's not advice to go out and buy shares. Yeah,
right.
They did go for LinkedIn, and Microsoft pipped them to the post.
Exactly.
But yes, they have aspirations to just be the enterprise SaaS backend, as it were. So it's a very interesting kind of thing. I wouldn't be surprised if Ben Thompson didn't do some sort of article about it, because he pays a lot of attention to Salesforce, but he doesn't typically pay attention to Tableau because it's not in his.
Because it's just his BI, right?
Yeah, exactly. So in fact, I'm just gonna quickly Google now and see if Ben Thompson has actually written anything on.
So while you're googling that, this is another podcast that me and Tim Tim introduced me to, which is called what's it called? Exponent.
Yeah.
Which is a great tech podcast, and I think it was one of the ones that almost inspired us to do one, right? Because it's such an interesting one that you can just listen to and take in a bit more information, learn a lot more about different angles, and I think. Especially around, I think that the acquisition for me was another time where we realized like we are so small that in Tableau, and Alteryx as our sort of niches, and there's so much more out there in the compute space and the data space and the service cloud offering, right? Because ultimately, Salesforce.com is a massive cloud platform. Tableau, in their article, did mention that. They are going to continue offering on-premise solutions, but I wouldn't be surprised if this just makes their cloud offering that much bit better. Like it just makes it a bit more easier and cleaner to be ready to go. Right? It's all of that onboarding, softer stuff that Tableau's working on and improving and really driving towards that Salesforce perhaps has in a better way. And this is where the exciting, let's see how this plays out stance comes along from both of us.
Exactly. It turns out Ben did write an article yesterday about Looker and Salesforce and Tableau and Google. So, it's behind his paywall. So
okay, from the newsletter.
Yeah, it's an actual newsletter article, which means it's of high quality. I'm trying to see if someone summarized it somewhere. Maybe it's almost worth paying that £10 a month. I hate this. The amount of subscriptions I have access to is just like ridiculous. You pay £10 a month for freaking everything.
Yeah.
But no, this acquisition is exciting. I think there's lots to come. I think it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. I'd be keen to see what you see at conference next year, because that will be
next week. Yeah,
that I feel sorry for the Tableau organizers, because I genuinely get the sense they had no idea this was happening, right? Having to sort of pivot the discussion points at conference next week is a tough challenge, right?
Right. And even though you can play the it's not done yet, we don't know. Yeah, everything's going to say the same. Don't worry about it. Card. It's always going to get those cogs turning about, okay, what's next? What does this actually mean?
Exactly.
That sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. that was a nice short podcast, about half an hour. Thanks
Absolutely.
everyone for listening and tuning in. Send us your feedback. What do you think? What are your thoughts on this move? And were you expecting it? Was it something somewhat not expected? And where do you see yourself if you're a Tableau user or even a Salesforce user?
Perfect. I'll catch you next week, Ravi.
Nice one. Take care. Cheers, guys.